What we had was a few kind of fixed points from Stephen. 50 years in the future, Washington, D.C., a benign world, apparently. Green, no fossil fuel, technology works. And at the core, there's these three precognitive beings who are an experiment. They're the first one of their kind. They have a 50-mile radius, we imagine, and therefore there's a massive influx of people into DC. A new piece of urban design, architecture, infrastructure, transportation, all of the components, education, consumer culture. But our process is, to me, you have to go very, very broad. You have to know a lot about the context of the world as a whole, and then you start testing it, either because you know about specific story parts or you want to learn more and go deeper. So the vertical slice and the horizontal slice become this kind of dynamic relationship of transportation. How do you get to work? How does Tom Cruise get to work from one of those tall buildings to the police department in the middle of DC? And we prototyped that as a transportation infrastructure, and also as a way of evolving a new kind of vehicle, a vehicle that had to go vertically and horizontally. Where you have this piece of prototyping on the bottom left, which is a previs, very closely matched to the final film on the top left, because Steven Spielberg actually directed the previs, not the film in this sequence. The film was assembled by a very careful analysis of the previs. And the evolution of, in this case, the vertical car chase allowed Stephen and Scott Frank to come in to examine the possibilities of the world and write to the world as it pre-existed. But what we have learned as well is that by building from the very beginning, which we do within one to 2 weeks, I'm in a 3D space, I have cameras, I have avatar characters, from the very beginning of the design process, what we see is that we actually become the author in several ways. So we can enter the world in character and test the authorship of the way the environment unfolds from inside. This is a highly fluid kind of map, but what it suggests is that you can kind of enter a story from any number of places. You can enter from what you know about topography and weather and time, history. You know, if you enter a story at a certain point in time in a certain country, you know a lot about context. If you enter the world in a certain, on the planet Mars, you know a lot about terrain and you know about weather conditions and gravity. Society evolves out of those kind of relationships where a river meets a rail system, meets a specific terrain. Our human cities have evolved always in those kind of conditions. So we can use exactly the same rules as we understand in the real world to develop fantastical, futuristic, historical, or absolutely grounded, reality-based world. Narrative design in McDowell about 8 or 10 years ago now, but it still seems to hold up. We're trying to modify it as we go. What we noticed again was that the notion, the 20th century industrial model, linear model of pre-production, production, and post-production are completely redundant. What we really are doing when we're all working together in this non-linear space is we're working in a process that looks more like inception, prototyping, capture in the case of film, or an increase of resolution in the case of something like a game space, and through into finishing. And the tools that are key to that are these visualization and prototyping tools. This becomes a kind of trans-platform space where you can look at using exactly the same process in a linear, film, TV, animation kind of passive space, in interactive web design, mobile publishing, game space, and indeed in live space. By doing the due diligence, doing deep research and doing the work to embed the world that you build with all of the information you need to actually have that world play out for the future. Looking at this system, on the left, John Underkoffler, who's the man on the right there, was our science advisor, came from MIT Media Lab. We have the ability with our storytelling kind of power now to really predict the future, not only in make it